Hello, welcome everyone. Sorry, I was just jamming out to some music in my head. Um, how's it going? Hope you guys are doing good. I see some people showing up on the stream here. My name is Noble Hauer. I'm the youth pastor at First Baptist Church in Rolla, Missouri, and welcome to my stream. We are doing Reading the Bible Online, where we are going through the book of Mark, and it's been fun so far. We've made it to the halfway mark of Mark chapter 5. And anyway, I'm glad you guys have joined us. So I see my wife has joined me, so that's always wonderful. And my mom, so I got my family out of the way. It's good to have family watching. I also see Fred has jumped on here, and Kevin Walker's good to see you, man. I hope everything's going good with you. If you are watching and you have the ability, please comment so I know who you are. I can see that there are people on, but I don't know who they all are unless you make a comment. So anyway, and if you're seeing this in the future, leave comments, ask a question, whatever. I'd love to read those comments and get back with you on stuff. So I want to let you know that after next week, I do plan on going live next week, and we'll start in Mark chapter 6 next week. But after that, I'll be taking a break, probably about a month long. We'll be taking a break, but I do plan on coming back. But I'm taking a break because we have church camp coming up, and so I'll be gone for that. And then I've got another church camp that I'm leading worship for, and I'll be gone for that. I will be back the next week, but I think I'm just going to keep taking that break there. But then the next week I'm on vacation, so it's even a better break, going down to the beach with my family and friends. So anyway, hopefully you won't miss me too much. We have been getting some good views on this, so make sure that you're sharing it with your friends and family. Yeah, because this is how God's word can get out. This is a good way for you to share the gospel with other people, because we are talking about the Gospel of Mark. I see Mike Shelton jumped on here. How's it going? So let's get into this. I mentioned at the very beginning of our series a few weeks back, actually a few months back, we've been doing this for a while, that I really love how Mark writes. Okay, now Mark, basically, he was not an eyewitness to Jesus, but he hung out with an eyewitness. He hung out with Peter, and Peter basically is telling him everything that happened. But then Mark is this brilliant writer, and I love how he does it. His writing style, in my mind, it resembles a first century equivalent to a teenage novel. Okay, it's short, it's to the point, it keeps things moving, it's got wonderful exclamations, he gets excited about things, and he also uses kind of a unique forms of writing, something you don't find in the other gospel writers. And I just think it's really cool. I really like the way he does that. One of the most notable forms of unique writing has been coined as the Markan Sandwich. The Markan Sandwich. And so if you saw the title of my video, I talk about the Markan Sandwich. We actually talked about this a little while back because we've already covered one of the Markan Sandwiches. Basically, it's where Mark will begin a story, and then he'll interrupt the story with another story. And then after that story's over, he will go to the original story. So you got the first piece of bread, he begins a story. The meat is where he kind of breaks off and he tells a different story. And then after that story, he finishes with the last piece of bread, back to the original story. And a lot of commentators, they'll agree that these little interpolations happen for a reason. And so when you come across one of these Markan sandwiches, just realize it's there for a reason. He wrote it that way on purpose. Mark is trying to make a point with the interruption. So in today's passage, we'll take a look at the significance of Mark's two stories that have been crammed together into a delicious sandwich. And this is found in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. So Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. I will put it up on the screen, but if you do have your own Bible and you want to read along that way, that's fine. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. You can read from whatever translation you like. So our past couple of episodes of Reading the Bible Online, we've seen Jesus do ministry on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. And then he gets in a boat and he begins to cross the sea, which is where he then calms the storm. And he reaches the east side of the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of Gentile territory, and he encounters the demoniac. That was last week. So if you want to see how Jesus handled a man that had thousands of demons in him, then go back and watch last week's episode. But he casts out the multitude of demons, and then he sends this guy on his way and instructs him to tell his family about what happened. And the man goes off on a mission. He begins traveling from town to town and telling people what happened, how Jesus showed him mercy. And now they're getting back into the boat to go back to the west side. So Jesus is traveling to the west side. And we're going to read our whole passage, Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. I see Pat Moon jumped in. It's good to see you. So let's get to our passage here, Mark chapter 5, 21 through 43. I'm just going to read it all, and then from there we will go back and kind of break it up a little bit. So let's read our passage. So Jesus got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, that's the west side, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. "My little daughter is dying," he said. "Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live." Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe, for she thought to herself, "If I can just touch his robe, I will be healed." Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." While he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep." The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened, and then he told them to give her something to eat. All right, so there's our passage, and I'm sure you can tell by the visual, or you can tell by just listening to it, how the sandwich was. So here was the beginning, the first part of the sandwich. Here's the meat area, and then here's the last slice of bread going on the sandwich. And so we see that Jesus and his disciples are back on the west, okay, hold on. Let me go back here for a second. Jesus encounters Jairus. Jesus encounters a sick woman. Jesus takes care of Jairus' problem. That's your sandwich. It seems pretty simple, but it's just the flow in the life of Jesus. But Mark doesn't detail every little step that Jesus takes. I mean, we don't know what else occurred on that short journey. I mean, there was surely more that was going on, but for some reason, Mark emphasizes this encounter with the sick and bleeding woman. Now, he could have told these stories separately. He could have talked about how Jesus did this with Jairus, and then he could have told the story separately. Jesus did this for the sick woman. But we're going to go back and read in detail to see if we can figure out why Mark set it up this way. So, let's read Mark 21 through 24 right there. Okay, so you guys can see that. Okay, this is the first slice of bread. We're going to read the whole first slice of bread. So we see that Jesus and his disciples are back on the west side of the lake. So let's read it. So Jesus got into the boat again, went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Verse 22. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. My little daughter is dying, he said. Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live. Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. So, a couple weeks ago, Jesus was over by Capernaum, and a huge crowd was around him. Now, he did some stuff there, and he kind of got into the boat to kind of go away, to get away. But we find out later from last week that he actually went across the lake for a reason. He crossed the Sea of Galilee to get over to the east side in this Gentile territory, and it almost seems like he went there on purpose to heal this demoniac, the guy that had a bunch of demons in him. But now they've gone back to the side of Capernaum where he left the crowd, and it says that there's a large crowd gathering around him. So there's still this huge crowd there. And that's when a man approaches Jesus. This man wasn't just any man. His name is Jairus, and he is the local synagogue leader. As the synagogue leader, Jairus is a very prominent figure in his community. In those days, a person would only bow or fall at the feet of someone that was much greater than them, like a king or God himself. For Jairus to humble himself in this way before Jesus was to recognize Jesus' power in a real serious way. So when Jairus comes, he shows up and he falls at Jesus' feet. This is a huge act of humility. Now, on a human level, this might be why it caught Jesus' attention. Because, I mean, there's a lot of people around, and there might be a lot of other people, kind of begging him to heal them or whatever. But Jairus kind of does it in an extravagant way. And this could be a really big deal because, as we've seen so far, a lot of the religious leaders were already plotting against Jesus. And for Jairus, I mean, he's kind of risking his social status at this point by going and falling at Jesus' feet. But Jairus pleads for help because his daughter is dying, and he believes that Jesus can heal her. This is huge. Word has gotten out about Jesus' ministry and about all the healings he's been doing. But like I said, many of the religious leaders, they've been plotting to get rid of Jesus. And I'm sure that some rumors have been circulating. So I'm sure Jairus in the synagogue have already heard kind of what's been going on and why people are talking about this Jesus guy. But Jairus has a major concern. His daughter needs to be healed. Now, this daughter, this little girl, we find out later at the end of the passage, which we read earlier, she's 12 years old. And I think that Mark brings out that age for a reason. She has just reached an age where her dreams of marriage would come to fruition. It was common in those days for a young girl, as they grow up, they really look forward to their wedding day. And that wedding day would be the greatest part of their life. And so for one to die unmarried just before they reach this age of maturity, it was a huge tragedy for them back then. So anybody that heard this story would yes, feel for Jairus, but they would also feel for this girl who she's now at that fruitful age of marriage in those days. And I know 12 seems to be pretty young to us, but in those days that was about the age that they started looking at wedding bells for the daughter to find a husband. So those that were mourning this sick girl, they would have known this, especially her father. So he desperately needs her healed. But just as Jesus takes off with Jairus, the story is paused for a moment, and Mark gets to the meat of his sandwich. So let's read that part. This is let's just read a couple verses, 25 and 26, and talk about that for a moment. So Mark 25, verse 5, 25, and 26. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. Now, I got to point this out. I think this is kind of interesting. We're dealing with a lady here who's been suffering with this constant bleeding for 12 years. Is it just coincidence that the daughter of Jairus that Jesus is going to heal is 12 years old? I don't know. I don't know if Mark put those details in there for a reason to make a relation. But anyway, that just kind of occurred to me. I thought it was kind of interesting. So we're going to stop here to look at this woman and her need. So she's not named in the text. She doesn't have a name. Okay, she's not named. So she's a no-named individual who's just kind of part of the crowd. She says that she's been bleeding for 12 years, or it says that she's been bleeding for 12 years. It's supposed that she was continually bleeding as if she was constantly on her menstrual period. So you ladies kind of know what I'm talking about there. Now, this would not only be a really bad sickness or ailment, but it would also render her ceremonially unclean under the law. Socially and religiously, she would be considered ceremonially unclean in the Jewish community. So now she is a no-named woman who is unclean. She's an outcast, one who is not to be touched or touch anyone else, since it might make them ceremonially unclean also. And the sickness that she has, it kind of insinuates here, is uncurable. It says that she suffered a great deal from a lot of doctors. I'm sure that some of you might be able to relate to this. I mean, we expect our doctors to be able to take care of us today, right? But sometimes they don't get it right. I'm sure that some of you have had, like a misdiagnosis or they tried one thing and it didn't work, so they have to try another. That happens a lot of times when people have to take medicines. They try medicine, but their body doesn't, it kind of rejects that medicine. But that is today. Think about it, what it was like back then. Back then, many of the practices for healing people would be kind of sketchy. They would almost be superstitious, like, hey, go outside and grab a hold of a tree and squeeze it as hard as you can for 20 minutes, and then you might be healed. I mean, I just made that up. But the thing is if a known remedy didn't work, then they would just try something else that might be outlandish too. And then they would try something else and something else. Even in the not too distant past from us today, not too distant part of our history, there have been a lot of medical procedures that are now known to not be good. Like, I'm sure you've heard of bloodletting. That's bleeding a patient to heal them. Or what about severing nerves, like in a lobotomy, to cure psychological issues? I mean, these are things that people thought actually worked, and those were implemented just like 150 years ago. Imagine the practices 2,000 years ago. Now, so this woman, she's gone to doctors, she's gone to healers, but have had no luck. In fact, it's been worse. Now, people would pay these first century physicians or healers a large portion of their income. And this lady, it says that she's paid all she had. She has nothing left, nowhere to go. Not only did she get nothing for her money, but she's gotten worse over the years. So let's continue looking at her situation and the solution. So let's read verses 27 through 29, right there. I'm going to take a drink real fast. All right, verse 27. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I could just touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. All right, so her solution is Jesus. I think she's on to something there, right? I mean, our solution is Jesus also. And it says that she came up behind him. Why do you think she approached Jesus this way? Why didn't she just walk up and ask like many of the other people? Why didn't she just come up and say, Jesus, I need your healing? Was she not confident in Jesus's ability? She might have been embarrassed. She might have thought, well, if I touch him and he knows that and other people see it, then he's going to be ceremonially unclean also. Maybe her faith was lacking. Now, I really doubt that, because I think that she had loads of faith in Jesus, or at least loads of faith in Jesus's abilities, but maybe not as much confidence in how he would treat her. Now, remember, the large crowd had seen Jesus do some pretty great things. Many of them, though, did not understand the real purpose behind what Jesus was doing. Here Jesus is following a prominent member of society to heal his daughter. He's following Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, a very important person. Of course, Jesus had time for someone with such great high social status as Jairus. Why would he take time out and stop for this no-name outcast? That had to be her feeling going into this. That's what I'm thinking. She had not really truly grasped the nature of Jesus's love for humanity, but she wanted to take a risk anyway. And it would be a risk, because here she is in a crowd of people. Anyone she touched on her way through the crowd would be considered unclean for the day, according to Leviticus 15. You can go back and look at that if you want to. This includes Jesus. So just her touching Jesus, it could be a bad thing. What if he finds out? I mean, what if she touches him and as soon as she touches him, he turns around and sees her? What would happen? What if he finds out that he's been touched by someone in her state? What would other people think about this rabbi, this religious teacher, if he's now ceremonially unclean? But for her, it was worth the risk. It was a risk worth taking. She hoped that just a little touch would do the job. And she was correct. It says that the bleeding immediately stopped and that she could feel it in her body that she was healed. It wasn't some warm fuzzy or a hyped up thing. She didn't I feel good, but then later on not. It was pure healing. She had been under this affliction for 12 years, and a simple step of faith brought healing. But what are the consequences now? What's going to happen? So let's read on. Verse 30. Let's do 30. Let's go ahead and do the rest of the meat of this sandwich. Right there. All right. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him. So he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept on looking around to see who done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." Okay, so now we get to find out. Oh no, Jesus figured it out. It says that he felt the healing power go out of him. Okay, now some might suggest that this indicates that Jesus has limits in his powers, as if healing too many people would diminish his healing powers, or that his powers might go away. Now, I don't think that's the case. We do know that Jesus has limits in his physical body. He needs to eat. He needs to drink. He needs to rest, just like any of us. We see that he goes and he's sleeping, even in a storm, in a boat. We see him eating food with other people. He needs these things. But I don't think that he had some power reserve of healing and be like, "Oh, I feel drained now that somebody touched me and took my healing power." When it says that he felt the healing power go out of him, I think it's just an indication of his sensitivity to the healing of a person, to the need of a person. He wasn't upset about it. It doesn't seem like he wasn't drained from the event. He was just curious who received this gift of grace. I think that he wanted to find out who this person was. He said, "Who touched my robe?" And of course, this was a silly question according to the disciples. I mean, the crowd was pressing around Jesus. There were tons of people touching him or his robe. I mean, it seems as though Jesus ignored his disciples, though, and just kept looking around, trying to find this person. His real concern was for the person that was healed, but he didn't find her. Now, I read this passage in a couple different translations, and if you have one that says differently, it doesn't look like Jesus really finds the woman on his own. Instead, the woman had experienced such an amazing healing that she presents herself to him. Okay, so because it says, the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, she came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. So it's not like he looked and saw her and was like, "Hey, that was you." No, I mean, she came to him. And I think this is a bold move. She doesn't really know how this is going to go. She doesn't know, is he going to scold her? She still touched him while being ceremonially unclean. And she was a no-name nobody, bothering a guy who's on his way to an important figure's house to heal that person's daughter. And also, she was a she. You know, the reality of those days was that women were considered lower in society. So how dare she stop this man, Jesus, while Jesus is on some other important mission? But I love this scene because it's so beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. Jesus addresses the lady and calls her daughter. Daughter. Okay? If there was no other words after this, that one word says so much to me. You know, in the beginning of our passage, Jesus was encountered by a father who was greatly troubled by his own daughter's sickness. And thrown right in the middle, another daughter needs healing, a child of God, one that Jesus sees, and this person needs healing. The lady who thought she was nobody, thought she would try to not bother Jesus because he was on some other important mission. This sick and bleeding woman who was regarded as unclean, Jesus looks at her and calls her daughter. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. It was like Jesus wanted her to know that she was important. That she was important enough to bother him. That she now didn't just experience a miraculous event, but she experienced the grace of God. That she did count. She wasn't a nobody. She was a somebody. And she actually has a name. The name is daughter, child of God. So beautiful to me. Now, at this point, Mark moves into the last piece of bread in our sandwich. Now, this lady is important, but Jairus and his daughter are important also. There's still work to be done. So let's continue on to the last piece of bread in our sandwich. Starting in verse 35, let's do 35 through 39, right there. So while he was still speaking to her, the lady, messengers arrived from the house of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep." So this scene, it shifts very quickly. No sooner does Jesus finish speaking with the daughter that he had healed, some messengers come and say that Jairus' daughter was dead. No need to trouble the teacher now. Wasn't that kind of the attitude of the bleeding woman too? Don't want to trouble you. But Jesus overheard them. It says overheard them. Now that word for overheard, it can also be translated as ignored. That he ignored their comment about the child being dead and just said, don't be afraid. Just have faith. Now, think about it. How would you feel if you were in this situation? Okay, you just saw something awesome happen. I mean, Jairus is right there when Jesus heals this other lady. I mean, you could be upset if you're Jairus and be like, why did you take the time out here? Maybe you could have got back and healed my daughter before she died. Or would you be, and then Jesus says, have faith. Just have faith. I mean, it's okay. How would you feel? How would you feel in this situation? Would you believe Jesus? Would you believe that Jesus can do this? The worst news you've ever gotten was just delivered. But now this rabbi from Nazareth says to just have faith. And this is when Jesus gets serious. He gets serious. Think about this for a second. Every time in the Gospels that there's a serious moment that happens, I mean, every time a serious moment comes into play in the life of Jesus, he stops people from following. He grabs his three closest friends, Peter, James, and John, and he sets off to do the work. Isn't that true? I mean, this is an important thing. Jesus has not brought anybody back to life yet. This is something big, all right? So he sets off to do the work. Now we know that he's about to do something truly amazing. He arrives at the residence to see a group of mourners. They're crying and causing a commotion. Now, I had to look this up because I found it interesting. In those days, when someone died, even a lower class citizen, there were professional mourners that would arrive to pay respects, and they would also remove the body, all right? And even more would show up in the case of someone with such high social status like Jairus. So Jesus left one large crowd and told them to stay away, but then he encounters a smaller crowd of these mourners. So there's still a lot of people around, but he does it so calmly and smoothly. He shows up. He says, what's all the hubbub about? Why all the commotion? Why are you guys crying? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep. So how do they receive that news? And that's the interesting part. Let's continue reading 40 through 42. We're going to leave the last verse till the end. So verses 40 through 42. The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave. And he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, get up. And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Well, their reaction may seem kind of rude, right? I mean, they're at a house where the little girl just died, and they're laughing at Jesus because he said she's only asleep. Well, I want you to keep in mind that this larger group of professional mourners, it's kind of like the equivalent of the city morgue, okay? When somebody dies, they have to come and remove the body. And although they probably knew who Jairus was by reputation, many of them probably didn't have an emotional connection with the family. In fact, since they had probably done this before, they knew a dead body when they saw one. So when Jesus says, this girl is asleep, they're like, ha, right. We've seen dead bodies before. We know that this girl is dead. You're just loony, right? Now, we don't know how long she'd been dead, but long enough that the messengers had been dispatched and relayed the sad news, but probably not very long, as they wouldn't have wanted the dead body we wouldn't want it to remain in the residence and begin to stink. Okay, so I would guess maybe hours had passed. I don't think, definitely not days, but long enough that these mourners were absolutely positive that she was dead, not asleep, even to the point that they laughed at Jesus when he said this. So Jesus then tells them all to leave. He had this under control. Now, I don't know how that went down. Mark doesn't go into that. It would be interesting to see what their response would be if Jesus was like, get out of here, leave. I know you're here to do your job, but just get out of here. I'm going to take care of it. I mean, I don't know if they're thinking, is okay, we'll leave. You can remove the body. I don't know. But then Jesus takes Peter, James, John, Jairus, and the girl's mother into the room. And then Jesus holds her hand and speaks to her in Aramaic. Now, that's the words. Talitha cum is an Aramaic phrase, and it literally translates as, maiden, arise. Now, our passage says it translates, little girl, get up. Other translations say, kind of elaborate a little bit more. But the basic idea is, little young maiden, arise. Now, Jesus, he might have used Aramaic because it might have been the girl's native language, but Aramaic would have been known to most people in that time period, in that area. But one interesting tidbit is this, that in some cultural scholars will say that magicians in those days would speak unintelligible phrases when they healed people. So they might use forms of other languages or words that aren't even real to try to heal somebody. But it's interesting that Jesus would speak in a fairly common tongue to show his full intention and his full power. Kind of like saying, I'm not like those other healers. I'm not like those magicians that ramble on. I'm going to do it really pretty easily. I'm just going to say, get up in Aramaic. So, Talitha cum, little girl, get up. Now, as I've stated before, Mark is really good at exclamations. He's really good at hyping things up and as much as possible. But, and honestly, if I was Mark and I was writing this as like a teenage novel, I might be tempted to embellish a little bit, talk about how Jesus waved his arms around and light streaming in from above, but that never happens. It never happens. Even Mark displays the humbled power of Jesus, who doesn't break a sweat, even when bringing someone back from the dead. I mean, he just, little girl, arise. I mean, no fancy movement, no fancy talk. Just boom, it happens. No big deal. And the thing is, no time passes. There's no suspenseful buildup, leaving the audience to wonder if the healing is going to work, right? I mean, I've seen so many movies like that. I mean, somebody dies, but then there's some kind of like healing resurrection power, and then it lasts forever, and you're like, oh, they're probably really dead. But then after a while, the dramatic buildup, and they're like, I'm alive. But no, it doesn't happen that way in our passage. Jesus is too powerful. Death doesn't hold anything on Jesus. It says that she immediately stands up, and she doesn't like get up out of bed and be like, what happened? No, she stands up and walks around as if nothing happened. And I can see Jesus turning to the girl saying, daughter, the faith of your father has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. Now, he doesn't say that, but I feel like that's kind of the connection from this little girl and the bleeding woman in the middle of this passage. Instead, Jesus tells them something completely different. So let's read the rest of our passages. Mark 43, verse 43. So Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened, and then he told them to give her something to eat. So here we see Jesus once again tell his viewers to be silent about what they just witnessed. Okay, this is a big deal. Like I said, nobody had been, brought back from the dead like this, and it's such a big thing. I mean, people have been healed, demons have been cast out, but now we have a resurrection. We have a resurrection, and I don't know how they're going to keep it a secret. I mean, they're really not going to be able to, because I mean, the mourners were there. They saw that the girl was dead. They had already started planning out the funeral. And so now the girl is alive. I mean, are they going to just chalk it up as be like, huh, he was right. She really was just asleep. I don't know, but it'd just be really hard to hide something like this. But we've talked about it before, and it can be a little puzzling, but I think there's a lot of reasons that Jesus tells people to keep this kind of stuff a secret. Okay, and I'm going to give you a couple of those real fast, just kind of a recap. First, Jesus' ministry required him to travel and speak to people. But if crowds are so big, crowding in on him, they become nearly overwhelming. They're already overwhelming. And that's because some people did not keep quiet like Jesus asked them to. It would have been a little easier to spread the gospel message to a smaller group where he could navigate around. And by displaying power and wonderful works, thousands were flocking to the show. And what a show it was. Many would, and sadly, many would only witness the bells and whistles, the show, but they'd never understand the functionality of the engine, what really made Jesus tick, what he was really there for. So that's one reason. A second reason is Jesus, I think, was more concerned with his mission to establish a kingdom, to serve and save humanity, than he was about his popularity. It wasn't about, hey, look at me, look how awesome I am. He was actually a small group minister, all right? His real concern was training up his small group of disciples, that they would be his hands and feet to spread the good news. That was the style he chose as the vehicle for his message. That smaller group would go out and raise more disciples and continue on. Now, finally, I think that Jesus did this kind of thing because of the perceptions that the Jewish community had of what a Messiah was supposed to be. And the Messiah was nothing like what they thought the Messiah was supposed to be. They viewed the Messiah as a reigning king that would overthrow the oppressive government. But that was not the path Jesus was taking, and he didn't want his powerful demonstrations to hinder his real mission of being a servant leader, a servant king. Now, those are just my thoughts on the subject, but I think they kind of line up, especially since it seems that he only does this in the Jewish community, but he doesn't do it in the Gentile lands. He's working on his own timetable, revealing himself in his own way. Now, finally, the very last little bit of our passage here, it says that Jesus tells them to get the girl something to eat. Now, I don't think there's anything real significant about this, except eating properly is a good way to recover from a sickness, or Jesus had just a wonderful way of throwing food into the mix of his ministry. Why not do it here too? So speaking of food, that is your Markan Sandwich. The reason for Mark's two stories and the way he told them, if you hadn't already figured it out yet, is the stark contrast between the two people that needed help. One was a well-known high society figure. The other was a no-named nobody. But it doesn't matter to Jesus. Jesus came to heal and forgive us all. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're popular or if you're an outcast. Jesus is here for you. So I want to encourage you, next time you read in the Gospel of Mark and you come across one of these segments where there's a story and then interrupted by another story and then a continuation of the first story, he's doing that for a reason. Figure it out. Try to learn from it. It can really help you in Bible study, and it can help you in the revelation of Scripture. I think the Holy Spirit kind of led Mark to do this for a reason, and I think it's very interesting how it happens. So I want to thank you guys all for watching. I hope that this study's given you some great things to think about, and I really want to encourage you to share this video again with your friends and family. If you're on YouTube, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and also share the video from there, because the more you do that kind of stuff, the more other people can hear the gospel. And that's really what this is all about. I'm not monetized. If you do see ads on my video, it's not from me. It's from YouTube. they are, they are trying to make money on my content, which they have a right to do, sadly. But tell people about it. Spread the word, because this is a good way to tell people about Jesus. So again, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you later. And again, I'll be here next week, but after that, I'm going to take about a month off. But we'll get back. I will finish the book of Mark. All right. So, all right.